The crisp autumn air of Tulsa, Oklahoma, was usually a welcome relief in early October, but in 1991, it carried a chilling mystery that would haunt the city for decades. It began with the inexplicable disappearance of Charles Grant, a name synonymous with integrity and hard work in the bustling heart of the community. Charles owned Grant's Hardware, a neighborhood fixture where generations had bought everything from nails to garden hoses. One Tuesday morning, the doors to his beloved store remained inexplicably locked, the open sign stubbornly unflipped, and a palpable silence hung heavy in the air. Customers peered through the glass, confused, then concerned. His truck, a sturdy Ford F-150, sat exactly where he always parked it, pristine and untouched. The only clue, if one could even call it that, was the account of a single, nervous delivery driver who claimed to have seen Charles speaking animatedly with an unknown individual near the back entrance of his warehouse late the previous evening, under the pale glow of a single sodium lamp. The driver, hurried by his schedule, thought nothing of it at the time, but the image seared itself into his memory as the days turned into weeks. Then, the grim discovery: Charles's body, hidden away in a remote corner of his own vast warehouse, a place he knew like the back of his hand. The initial news spread like wildfire, transforming concern into widespread shock and a profound sense of loss throughout Tulsa. Charles Grant, at 52 years old, was more than just a hardware store owner. He was a true pillar of the community. His kind eyes and ready smile greeted everyone who walked through his doors, offering not just merchandise, but also advice, a friendly ear, and often, a small discount for those truly in need. He was known for his unwavering dedication to his business, a legacy inherited from his father, and for his deep-seated generosity. Whether it was sponsoring the local Little League team, or quietly slipping money to families struggling during tough times, Charles embodied the spirit of civic duty. At home, he was a devoted husband to Martha, his wife of 30 years, and a loving father to 2 grown children, Sarah and Michael, both of whom had recently moved away for college. His reputation in Tulsa was impeccable. No one could fathom who would wish him harm, let alone commit such a heinous act against a man so universally respected. His life was a testament to hard work, honesty, and an unwavering commitment to his family and his community, making his violent end incomprehensible to all who knew him. The initial shock quickly gave way to a maelstrom of confusion and frantic activity. The Grant family, reeling from the news, struggled to comprehend such a brutal betrayal of their patriarch. The Tulsa Police Department launched an immediate, extensive investigation, their primary focus centered on retracing Charles's last known movements. Detectives scoured the warehouse, the store, and every corner of his routine, desperately searching for anything that could illuminate the darkness of his final hours. They interviewed countless individuals, employees, neighbors, fellow business owners, and even the nervous delivery driver again, but the leads were few, and the motive remained agonizingly elusive. The police found themselves at a crossroads, faced with a beloved man brutally murdered, yet with no clear suspects, no obvious enemies, and a community crying out for answers. The question echoed through the streets of Tulsa: who could have done this to Charles Grant, and why? This is just the beginning of a story that gripped a city and defied resolution for decades. If you find yourself drawn to the chilling unknowns of cold cases and the relentless pursuit of justice, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Join us as we unravel more unsolved mysteries and true crime stories that stand as stark reminders of the darkness that can lurk beneath even the brightest surfaces. The initial days following Charles Grant's disappearance and the grim discovery of his body plunged Tulsa into a state of shocked disbelief. The Grant family, already reeling from the sudden, violent loss, grappled with an unbearable weight of grief mixed with frantic hope for answers. Martha, his wife, became a beacon of quiet resilience, her eyes betraying the deep sorrow she carried while her public statements pleaded for any information. Their children, Sarah and Michael, rushed back to Tulsa, their youthful optimism shattered by the brutal reality. The police investigation, despite its immediate intensity, seemed to hit wall after wall. Detectives meticulously interviewed everyone connected to Charles, from his longest-standing employees to casual acquaintances, yet concrete evidence remained frustratingly scarce. There were no obvious signs of a struggle in the warehouse, no forced entry, which led investigators to believe Charles either knew his assailant or was caught completely by surprise. The absence of a clear motive or any discernible pattern of animosity in Charles's life compounded their struggle, leaving them with more questions than answers as precious hours, then days, slipped away. The impact on the close-knit Tulsa community was profound. A cloud of fear and suspicion descended, replacing the familiar comfort of daily life. Whispers turned into anxious conversations at coffee shops and grocery stores. Who among them could be capable of such an act? Every unfamiliar face, every quiet neighbor, suddenly seemed a potential suspect in the public's eyes. Neighbors recalled Charles's unwavering kindness, his willingness to lend a hand, his generous spirit. Business associates spoke of his ethical practices and fair dealings, reiterating that he had no enemies, at least none that were apparent. The consensus was universal: Charles Grant was a good man, making his murder all the more baffling and terrifying. The senselessness of it all fueled a collective grief, but also a growing sense of unease. People locked their doors more carefully, watched their surroundings with newfound caution. The very fabric of community trust felt frayed, stretched thin by the brutal violence that had touched one of their own. Early police theories were varied, born more out of desperation than solid leads. Detectives considered the possibility of a robbery gone wrong, despite the lack of anything significant missing from the warehouse or Charles's person. This theory, however, didn't fully explain the precise nature of his death or the careful concealment of his body. Another line of inquiry explored a potential personal vendetta, perhaps a disgruntled customer or an old business dispute, but extensive checks revealed no such animosity in Charles's history. The idea of a random act of violence was also floated, a horrifying thought that suggested anyone could be next. Yet, the organized nature of the crime, the way Charles's body was hidden, seemed to contradict the impulsive violence often associated with random attacks. Without a body initially, the case had been classified as a missing person, a search operation. Once his remains were found, it officially became a homicide investigation, but even then, the lack of a clear direction or a primary suspect made progress agonizingly slow. Each theory led to a dead end, leaving investigators feeling increasingly frustrated and the community no closer to understanding the truth. As days bled into weeks, the initial flurry of media attention intensified, highlighting the baffling nature of the cold case. Local newspapers ran daily updates, their headlines screaming for justice for Charles Grant. Television news segments featured tearful pleas from Martha and the children, their faces etched with unbearable sorrow and a desperate longing for answers. The family's poignant calls for anyone with information, no matter how small, to come forward resonated deeply with the public. Every memorial, every candlelight vigil, served as a stark reminder of the void Charles had left and the unresolved questions that haunted the town. The mounting pressure from the media and the grieving family became another heavy burden on the Tulsa Police Department, pushing them to dedicate more resources, more time, yet still, the breakthrough they desperately sought eluded them. The initial momentum of the investigation began to wane, threatening to relegate Charles Grant's murder to the ever-growing pile of cold cases, a stark injustice that the family and the community refused to accept. As those initial weeks bled into months, the vibrant urgency surrounding Charles Grant's murder slowly but surely began to fade, giving way to the cold, hard reality of an unsolved case. The initial flurry of activity from the Tulsa Police Department, once relentless, dwindled to a dedicated but increasingly frustrated core. The news cycle moved on, drawn to fresh tragedies and unfolding dramas, and while Charles's name still surfaced periodically, it was often accompanied by the disheartening label, "Cold Case." The promising early leads, which had offered fleeting glimpses of hope, evaporated into thin air. Every tip, every potential witness statement, had been meticulously chased down, only to lead to another dead end or an alibi that stood up to scrutiny. The police department, once lauded for its swift response, now faced growing criticism from a community desperate for closure. The lack of progress became a palpable weight, a silent accusation hanging over every officer involved, and a constant ache for the Grant family. The examination of the warehouse and store, painstakingly conducted in the immediate aftermath, yielded frustratingly little in the way of concrete evidence. Forensic teams had swept every surface, meticulously photographed every corner, yet the scene offered perplexing contradictions. There was no sign of forced entry into either the store or the warehouse, suggesting that whoever killed Charles either possessed a key or was let in by him. This detail pointed investigators towards the chilling possibility that Charles had known his assailant, a notion that only deepened the mystery and heightened the sense of betrayal. The forensic evidence itself was sparse, a few smudged fingerprints that led nowhere, some fibers that couldn't be definitively linked to a suspect, and no DNA evidence advanced enough to be useful in 1991. The technology of the time was a stark limitation. What might be a breakthrough today was merely an unidentifiable trace then. The absence of a struggle also troubled detectives. Charles was a robust man, and it was difficult to reconcile his peaceful final moments with a violent act from a stranger. This lack of clear forensic indicators left investigators grasping at shadows, unable to construct a definitive narrative of that terrible night. For Martha Grant, and her children, Sarah and Michael, the passage of time brought not healing, but a deepening despair punctuated by flickerings of fierce hope. Each morning they woke to the same agonizing uncertainty, the same gaping hole in their lives where Charles should have been. Martha, once a vibrant woman, now moved with a quiet resignation, her strength channeled into the relentless effort to keep Charles's memory alive and his case from being forgotten. She corresponded tirelessly with the police, wrote letters to the local newspaper, and attended every community meeting where the murder was discussed. Sarah and Michael, trying to navigate their own grief, joined their mother in her crusade, their youthful energy now directed towards advocacy. They created flyers, organized small vigils on the anniversary of their father's death, and spoke passionately about the need for justice. The emotional toll was immense. Holidays were hollow, birthdays were a painful reminder of his absence, and every family gathering was shadowed by the unspoken question of who had taken him from them, and why they were still without answers. Their unwavering commitment was a testament to their love for Charles, a desperate act of love against the encroaching silence of an unsolved crime. The shadow of suspicion, an inevitable consequence of such a baffling crime, briefly touched several individuals in the early days of the investigation. Disgruntled employees, a couple of whom had been let go by Charles years prior, were questioned at length, their alibis scrutinized. Each was eventually cleared, their resentment not translating into motive or opportunity. A rival hardware store owner, known for his cutthroat business practices, also came under initial review. However, he too provided an ironclad alibi for the night of Charles's disappearance, and despite his reputation, there was no evidence to suggest he was capable of such violence. Even a few more obscure figures, customers Charles had allegedly had minor disagreements with, were briefly considered, but again, their stories checked out, and no credible link could be established. The meticulous work of eliminating these initial suspects, while necessary, only served to highlight the chilling emptiness of the case. With each person ruled out, the police were left with fewer leads, and the mystery surrounding Charles Grant's murder only deepened, settling like a shroud over the entire community of Tulsa. The question of who remained, haunting and unanswered. The question of who remained, haunting and unanswered, echoed through the halls of the Tulsa Police Department and within the hearts of the Grant family for decades. The initial intensity of the investigation, the fervent hope for a quick resolution, slowly faded into the background noise of life. Days turned into weeks, months into years, and those years eventually stretched into 2 full decades. Charles Grant's case, once a searing wound in the community's consciousness, became a file gathering dust in the cold case archives, a poignant reminder of justice delayed. Martha, Sarah, and Michael continued their quiet vigil, marking anniversaries with quiet reflection, never truly giving up hope, but the passage of time brought with it a heavy resignation. The world moved on, but for them, a part of 1991 remained perpetually frozen in time, waiting for the truth to be unearthed. Yet, as the years passed, so too did technology. Forensic science, once limited, experienced a revolution. DNA analysis, barely in its infancy in 1991, evolved into an incredibly powerful tool, capable of extracting genetic material from the most minuscule of samples. New techniques for analyzing trace evidence, digital forensics, and advanced criminal profiling emerged, offering a glimmer of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, Charles Grant's killer might one day be identified. It was a hope born not of active investigation, but of scientific progress. In the early 2000s, this simmering hope began to ignite into a tangible possibility. A new team of cold case detectives, assigned to review unsolved homicides in Tulsa, stumbled upon Charles Grant's file. These were officers steeped in modern investigative techniques, unburdened by the frustrations and dead ends that had plagued the original team. They approached the dusty case with fresh eyes, armed with a new understanding of forensic capabilities that simply didn't exist in 1991. The advancements in DNA analysis were particularly compelling, suggesting that evidence once dismissed as inconclusive might now hold definitive answers. The detective leading the review, Sergeant Miller, a meticulous and tenacious investigator, saw not a cold case, but a challenge, an opportunity to rewrite history for the Grant family. He believed that every case, no matter how old, held a key, a detail missed, a piece of evidence misinterpreted, waiting for the right perspective and the right tools. The reopening of the investigation was not a sudden burst of activity, but a methodical, almost academic, review of every single document, photograph, and piece of evidence associated with the case. As Sergeant Miller and his team delved deep into the old files, a surprising number of overlooked details began to surface. They meticulously reread every witness statement, cross-referencing them for subtle inconsistencies that might have been dismissed as minor decades ago. One particular detail caught their attention: the delivery driver's initial statement regarding an unknown individual speaking with Charles near the warehouse. The driver had described the person as unusually agitated, a detail that had been noted but never fully explored. The old crime scene photos, now digitally enhanced, revealed faint smudges on a distant shelf inside the warehouse, smudges that the original forensics team had attributed to dust or general grime. But with modern enhancement, Miller saw what appeared to be faint, almost transparent, fingerprints. These were not the clear, ridge-detailed prints sought in 1991, but something that might yield partial information with current technology. They also found a brief mention of a small, unusual button found near Charles's body during the original examination, a button that didn't match any on Charles's clothing and whose origin was never determined. It had been catalogued but then essentially forgotten. The new perspective brought by the cold case team was transformative. They didn't just re-examine the evidence, they reimagined the crime. The original investigation had largely focused on external threats, robbery or a clear personal vendetta. However, the new team, informed by advancements in criminal psychology and forensic behavioral analysis, considered a different angle: an acquaintance, someone Charles trusted, someone familiar with his routine and the layout of the warehouse, someone who could conceal his body with a chilling level of precision. They began to build a psychological profile, not of a random attacker, but of an individual who might harbor a hidden, deep-seated resentment, or a desperate motive that had been carefully masked. The lack of forced entry now pointed not just to an acquaintance, but potentially to someone Charles had let in, someone he might have even considered a friend or business associate. This shift in perspective allowed them to look at the existing witness statements and evidence through a new lens, assigning significance to elements previously deemed irrelevant and systematically questioning every assumption made by the original investigators. The cold case was slowly but surely beginning to thaw under the relentless scrutiny of modern investigative techniques and unwavering dedication. The cold case was slowly but surely beginning to thaw under the relentless scrutiny of modern investigative techniques and unwavering dedication. One specific piece of evidence, previously overlooked or underestimated, would ultimately lead to the incredible breakthrough everyone had been waiting for. It was that seemingly insignificant button, meticulously catalogued but largely dismissed in 1991, that became the linchpin. The original investigators had noted its unusual composition and design, a distinct pattern of polished dark wood with a unique metal inlay. But without a clear context, it was just another item in a box of miscellaneous findings. Now, with advanced forensic capabilities, Sergeant Miller's team sent the button to a specialized lab. The microscopic analysis revealed not just its intricate craftsmanship, but also minute fibers embedded in its crevices. These fibers, invisible to the naked eye in 1991, were a blend of synthetic and natural materials, dyed a specific shade of industrial blue, a color not commonly found in household clothing or Charles Grant's known wardrobe. Furthermore, a faint, almost imperceptible skin cell was extracted from the button's shank. This tiny, almost invisible fragment of human tissue, once useless, was now a potential goldmine for DNA profiling. The DNA profile generated from the single skin cell provided a crucial lead, a partial match in a national database, a database that didn't even exist in 1991. The match wasn't perfect enough for an immediate arrest, but it pointed to a specific family lineage, narrowing down the potential suspect pool dramatically. Coupled with the industrial blue fibers, the cold case team began cross-referencing this genetic information with the original witness statements, specifically looking for anyone who had regular contact with Charles Grant in a professional capacity, particularly those who might wear industrial uniforms. The path led them to a man named Robert Jenkins, who had been a part-time delivery driver for a competing hardware supplier in 1991, occasionally subcontracting work for Grant's Hardware during peak seasons. Jenkins had been briefly interviewed at the time but quickly dismissed due to a seemingly solid alibi provided by his then-girlfriend. He was considered a minor person of interest, just another face in the crowd of business associates, and never investigated deeply. He had seemed affable, regretful about Charles's death, and had moved out of state a few years later. No one had connected him to the initial delivery driver's account of an agitated individual. The slow, meticulous process of building a case against Robert Jenkins began. The team first located Jenkins, who was now living a quiet life in a small town several states away, working as a warehouse manager. They covertly collected a DNA sample from a discarded item he had used, confirming a definitive match to the sample from the button. This was the undeniable proof they needed. Next, they painstakingly revisited old records of Jenkins's employment, confirming his occasional deliveries to Grant's Hardware before 1991 and his use of standard-issue industrial blue overalls, the exact color and fiber composition matching those found on the button. They tracked down his former girlfriend, now an older woman, who, under intense questioning, recanted her alibi. She admitted that Jenkins had pressured her to lie, telling her to say he was with her all evening, when in fact, he'd been out for several hours that fateful night, returning agitated and refusing to discuss where he'd been. The pieces, once scattered and seemingly unrelated, were slowly but surely clicking into place, forming a coherent, terrifying picture. All of this was done without alerting Jenkins, moving stealthily to ensure he couldn't destroy evidence or flee. As the detectives dug deeper into Robert Jenkins's past, a dark and insidious motive began to emerge, one that went far beyond mere happenstance or a simple robbery gone wrong. They uncovered a hidden financial struggle. Jenkins was deeply in debt in 1991, a fact he had meticulously concealed from everyone, including his girlfriend. He had a gambling problem that spiraled out of control, accumulating significant losses. More chillingly, they discovered that Charles Grant, known for his quiet generosity, had subtly helped Jenkins out with small loans on 2 separate occasions, always urging him to seek help for his addiction. This act of kindness, intended to support, had instead fostered a simmering resentment in Jenkins. He felt humiliated by Charles's knowledge of his secret, and the loans, rather than gratitude, fueled a desperate plan. Jenkins had viewed Charles as a personal piggy bank, believing the older man kept large sums of cash on hand in his warehouse for business transactions, a common practice in those days. He planned to rob Charles, to take enough to cover his mounting debts and silence the one person who knew his shameful secret. His anger, shame, and desperation, combined with an intimate knowledge of Charles Grant's routines and the warehouse layout, had culminated in that tragic night in 1991. The motive wasn't external animosity, but a twisted betrayal of trust fueled by personal demons and a desperate, violent greed. The motive wasn't external animosity, but a twisted betrayal of trust fueled by personal demons and a desperate, violent greed. With the DNA evidence and the recanted alibi firmly in hand, the investigation intensified dramatically. Sergeant Miller's team initiated round-the-clock surveillance on Robert Jenkins. Every phone call, every trip to the grocery store, every interaction was meticulously documented. They scrutinized his finances, looking for any unusual transactions or large sums of money that might have been acquired since 1991. They reviewed his credit history, carefully tracing any sudden improvements that couldn't be explained by legitimate income. Meanwhile, plainclothes officers quietly interviewed Jenkins's current neighbors and colleagues, framing their questions around general inquiries about his character, his habits, and any unusual behaviors he might exhibit. They wanted to build a comprehensive psychological profile, understanding the man he had become, while also subtly searching for any cracks in his carefully constructed facade. The detectives strategically chose their moment, ensuring they had all their ducks in a row before making their move. Robert Jenkins was ultimately apprehended without incident during his lunch break, a picture of stunned disbelief on his face as officers calmly presented him with an arrest warrant for the murder of Charles Grant. He was transported back to Tulsa, a journey that must have felt like a trip through time, back to the place he had fled decades ago. The interrogation began cautiously, a dance between seasoned detectives and a man who had successfully buried his secret for 30 years. Jenkins initially maintained an air of bewildered innocence, feigning ignorance about Charles Grant and the events of 1991. He spoke of his mistake in leaving Tulsa, implying it was for a fresh start, not to escape justice. He presented a narrative of a simple, hard-working man, caught in a misunderstanding. But the detectives were prepared. They didn't lead with the DNA. Instead, they began with the subtle inconsistencies in his original witness statement, then moved to the recanted alibi of his former girlfriend. They presented fragments of evidence, slowly eroding his composure, watching for the telltale signs of a man cracking under pressure. The moment of truth arrived when Sergeant Miller, with a calm, unwavering voice, placed the digitally enhanced photograph of the wooden button with the metal inlay on the table, followed by the lab report confirming the DNA match from the tiny skin cell. Jenkins's face, which had maintained a facade of polite denial, visibly paled. His eyes darted nervously between the photo and the detective, then down to his own hands, trembling slightly. The carefully constructed wall of lies began to crumble. He started with a hesitant admission, a misunderstanding, over the amount Charles owed him, quickly escalating into a frantic, rambling narrative designed to minimize his culpability. He claimed self-defense, then accidental death, each iteration more desperate than the last. But faced with the undeniable weight of forensic evidence and the meticulous reconstruction of that night's events, his resolve finally shattered. The dam broke, and the full, horrifying story of Charles Grant's murder spilled out in a torrent of guilt and suppressed terror. Robert Jenkins confessed to ambushing Charles Grant in his warehouse after hours, not intending to kill him, but to rob him. He admitted knowing Charles kept cash on hand and had gambled away his own savings, driven to desperation by mounting debts. He had approached Charles under the guise of an urgent, late-night delivery request, gaining entry to the warehouse with ease due to his prior association. An argument had ensued when Charles, sensing Jenkins's true intentions, had refused to hand over his money. In a moment of panic and rage, Jenkins grabbed a heavy wrench he spotted on a nearby workbench and struck Charles, intending to incapacitate him, but the blow was fatal. Overcome with shock and fear, and realizing the gravity of his actions, Jenkins had then meticulously concealed Charles's body deep within a rarely used storage section of the warehouse, covering it with old tarps and discarded inventory, desperate to buy himself time to escape. He detailed how he had then cleaned up the immediate area, wiping down surfaces with rags to remove any fingerprints, and then fled the scene, believing he had successfully erased all traces of his crime. The entire confession, chilling in its detail, brought a stark, brutal clarity to the events of that fateful night in 1991. With the confession secured, the final, agonizing piece of the puzzle remained. Jenkins, his voice barely a whisper, recounted the precise location where he had hidden Charles Grant's body. Armed with this critical information, the cold case team, accompanied by Jenkins and a forensic recovery unit, returned to the old Grant's hardware warehouse, now a dilapidated, vacant property awaiting demolition. The air was thick with anticipation and a profound sense of closure hanging heavy in the cool morning light. Following Jenkins's directions, they systematically cleared decades of dust, debris, and forgotten relics from a secluded, rarely accessed corner. As they carefully peeled back layers of grimy tarpaulins and moved stacks of crumbling wooden crates, the skeletal remains of Charles Grant slowly emerged, resting exactly where they had been hidden for 30 years. The discovery, while grim, brought with it a profound sense of relief. After 3 decades of agonizing uncertainty, Charles Grant was finally found, his resting place revealed, bringing an end to the family's long nightmare of not knowing, and paving the way for the justice he so rightly deserved. With the confession secured, the final, agonizing piece of the puzzle remained. Jenkins, his voice barely a whisper, recounted the precise location where he had hidden Charles Grant's body. Armed with this critical information, the cold case team, accompanied by Jenkins and a forensic recovery unit, returned to the old Grant's hardware warehouse, now a dilapidated, vacant property awaiting demolition. The air was thick with anticipation and a profound sense of closure hanging heavy in the cool morning light. Following Jenkins's directions, they systematically cleared decades of dust, debris, and forgotten relics from a secluded, rarely accessed corner. As they carefully peeled back layers of grimy tarpaulins and moved stacks of crumbling wooden crates, the skeletal remains of Charles Grant slowly emerged, resting exactly where they had been hidden for 30 years. The discovery, while grim, brought with it a profound sense of relief. After 3 decades of agonizing uncertainty, Charles Grant was finally found, his resting place revealed, bringing an end to the family's long nightmare of not knowing, and paving the way for the justice he so rightly deserved. The arrest of Robert Jenkins sent shockwaves not just through Tulsa, but across the nation as the story of the solved cold case made headlines. The legal process moved with a deliberate pace, each step a painful but necessary reiteration of the horror Charles Grant had endured. Jenkins was formally charged with first-degree murder. The indictment was a thick document, detailing the meticulous work of Sergeant Miller's team, outlining the DNA evidence, the recovered remains, and Jenkins's chilling confession. For the Grant family, this meant a resurgence of media attention, but this time, it was different. There was a target, a face to the monster who had stolen their beloved Charles. Martha, Sarah, and Michael braced themselves for the trial, knowing it would force them to relive the darkest period of their lives, but determined to be present for every moment, to bear witness to the justice Charles deserved. The courtroom became a stage where decades of pain and silence were finally given a voice. Prosecutors presented an overwhelming case, meticulously piecing together the events of that 1991 night. They called forensic experts who testified about the advanced DNA analysis, detailing how a microscopic skin cell from an unassuming button had ultimately brought a killer to justice. The industrial blue fibers were presented, matching the type of uniform Jenkins wore. The former girlfriend, now a woman visibly burdened by her past complicity, tearfully recanted her false alibi, confirming Jenkins's agitated state and unexplained absence on the night of the murder. Most powerfully, the prosecution played excerpts from Jenkins's confession, his voice echoing through the silent courtroom as he recounted the fatal blow, the desperate concealment, and his subsequent flight from justice. The raw emotion, the chilling details, painted a vivid picture of a crime driven by desperation and betrayal. Robert Jenkins, facing a mountain of irrefutable evidence, eventually entered a plea of guilty, sparing the Grant family the protracted agony of a full trial. This admission, while a strategic legal move, also provided a final, definitive acknowledgement of his guilt. The judge, after hearing impact statements from Martha, Sarah, and Michael, delivered a sentence commensurate with the heinousness of the crime: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Justice for Charles Grant, delayed for 30 long years, had finally arrived. The courtroom, filled with reporters, community members, and a visibly relieved Grant family, erupted in a soft, collective sigh. It wasn't a celebration, but a profound moment of closure, a heavy weight lifted after decades of carrying an unbearable burden. The emotional journey of the Grant family through those 3 decades was one of unimaginable resilience. From the initial shock and despair of Charles's disappearance, through the frustrating years of a cold case, and finally to the bittersweet vindication of justice, their love for Charles had been their anchor. Martha, her eyes often filled with tears, spoke eloquently about the agony of not knowing, the constant gnawing question of where Charles was, if he had suffered, and who had taken him. Sarah and Michael, now adults with families of their own, recounted how their father's absence had shaped their lives, leaving a void that no passage of time could fill. But witnessing Jenkins's conviction offered a profound sense of peace. It didn't bring Charles back, but it honored his memory, confirming that even after so long, the truth could emerge, and accountability could be served. They could finally grieve properly, knowing his killer would pay for his crime. This remarkable resolution served as a powerful reflection on the importance of persistence in cold case investigations. It underscored the relentless dedication of law enforcement officers like Sergeant Miller and his team, who refused to let time extinguish the fire of justice. The case became a testament to the incredible impact of forensic advancements, particularly in DNA analysis. What was once an impossible task for investigators in 1991 became a tangible pathway to truth with the advent of modern science. Charles Grant's story became a beacon of hope for countless other families whose loved ones' cases lay dormant, proving that technology, combined with unwavering human resolve, could indeed unlock secrets buried for generations. It showed that memories might fade, but evidence, however minute, could speak volumes when given the right tools and the right ears to listen. The Grant family's long wait had ended, not with a whisper, but with a definitive answer, proving that sometimes, even in the coldest cases, justice will find its way. The judge's gavel struck, a sharp, resounding sound that echoed through the courtroom, signifying the end of a legal battle that had spanned 3 decades. Robert Jenkins, his face a mask of defeat, received the final sentencing, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. There was no fanfare, no jubilant celebration, only a profound sense of finality. For the Grant family, it was the definitive end of the legal torment, the closing of a chapter that had held their lives in a heartbreaking limbo for far too long. The perpetrator of Charles's murder would spend the rest of his days incarcerated, a stark reminder that even after 30 years, justice could, and would, ultimately prevail. The legal system, slow but ultimately sure, had delivered its verdict, upholding the fundamental principle that no crime, especially one as heinous as murder, should ever truly go unpunished. Outside the courthouse, amidst a throng of reporters and well-wishers, Martha Grant, flanked by her children, Sarah and Michael, spoke with a quiet dignity that belied the immense suffering she had endured. Her voice, though sometimes trembling, was clear and resolute. She spoke of her enduring love for Charles, a love that time and tragedy could not diminish. She shared the immense relief that now, finally, they knew the truth, and his killer had been held accountable. For 30 years, a part of our hearts was held captive by the unknown, Martha said, her gaze sweeping over the faces in the crowd. Today, that captivity has ended. It doesn't bring Charles back, but it gives us peace. The peace of knowing, the peace of justice. Sarah, her own composure hard-won, added, "My father was a good man, a kind man. He deserved better than what he got, but today, he got justice. We can finally truly mourn, truly heal, knowing he didn't just vanish. He was taken, and now, his taker pays the price." Michael, his arm around his mother, spoke of the profound impact on their community, reflecting on how Charles's memory had kept the case alive in the hearts of many, even when official investigations waned. "Tulsa never forgot Charles," he stated, "and that means everything to us." The community, having followed the agonizing journey from disappearance to resolution, collectively exhaled. There was a shared sense of vindication, a reaffirmation of the belief that some wrongs could, eventually, be righted. This extraordinary story, spanning decades and defying the odds of typical cold cases, stands as a powerful message of hope and perseverance. It highlights that justice, while often a long and arduous path, is not beyond reach, even when shadowed by the mists of time. It reinforces the critical importance of tenacity in law enforcement, the unwavering dedication of cold case detectives who refuse to let forgotten files remain just that. It is a testament to the advancements in forensic science, particularly DNA analysis and trace evidence examination, which have revolutionized the pursuit of truth, transforming microscopic clues into undeniable evidence. Most importantly, it is a tribute to the resilient spirit of families like the Grants, whose love, faith, and relentless pursuit of answers served as an unyielding beacon, guiding the slow march towards truth and accountability. Charles Grant's case is a poignant reminder that while time may heal some wounds, true healing often begins when the truth is revealed and justice is finally served. It proves that a community's collective memory, combined with modern investigative tools and unwavering human resolve, can pierce through the darkest mysteries, bringing closure and peace to those who have waited the longest. If you were moved by the poignant story of Charles Grant and the 3-decade-long pursuit of justice, please take a moment to like this video. Your engagement helps us share these important true crime narratives with a wider audience. We encourage you to share your thoughts, reflections, and any similar stories you might know in the comments section below. Your insights and discussions enrich our community. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more compelling true crime cases, cold case breakthroughs, and unsolved mysteries that continue to captivate and challenge us. Be sure to hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video, where we'll delve into another fascinating and often heartbreaking story from the annals of crime history.